Number 10. Allen Iverson. Listen, like most people, I love Allen Iverson. I love how he plays, I love what he's done for the culture, I love everything. But AI, compared to everyone else on this list, just hasn't done as much. Yes, he had that great MVP season in 2001, and led that pretty mediocre 76ers squad to the best record in the Eastern Conference and to the NBA Finals, where there was the iconic Tyronn Lue step-over. And Philadelphia was the only team to win a game against the Lakers in the whole playoffs. However, despite Iverson's outstanding play throughout the decade, with multiple 30-plus point seasons, for most of it, he was leading the Philadelphia 76ers to the 4th or 5th seed, in a poor Eastern Conference, which isn't too impressive. Iverson, though inefficient, was a great scorer, a great ball handler, and a great franchise player for Philly. But when comparing him to the other 9 players on this list, due to lack of team success, similar to Tracy McGrady, who doesn't find himself on this list, the answer was a great player, cursed with playing with bad teams. Even when paired with Carmelo Anthony at the end of the decade in the Nuggets, he played great, as they were both very talented scorers, but they never accomplished much. AI was a great player, but everyone on this list is, and he doesn't have the team success to put him any higher. Number 9. Jason Kidd. Personally, I feel like Jason Kidd had one of the most impressive achievements of the decade that tends to often get overlooked, which really surprises me. In 2002 and 2003, he led the solid, but not outstanding, New Jersey Nets to the NBA Finals 2 years in a row. I mean, people can say all they want how the Eastern Conference was trash back then, and try to take away some of its legitimacy. And while that is somewhat fair, leading a team to the Finals 2 years straight in any decade is impressive, especially when you had a team like those Nets. And it's not like Kidd objectively super carried them either like LeBron. He averaged about 15 points, 11 assists, 7 rebounds, and 2 steals, which is not bad numbers by any means, but they don't necessarily blow your socks off like other players that carry their teams to the finals, such as Allen Iverson or Hakeem Olajuwon. Jason Kidd just knew who he was playing with and ran their offense to perfection like he was a general. He was the king of the fast break and transition, similar to Magic Johnson, and despite him not having a great jumper, Kidd made it work, and while no one on that team were as offensively talented as he was or shot creators, he created offense for that Nets team and turned that squad into the best team they could be. In 2003 against the Spurs, that series was surprisingly closer than it should have been, and it took a great performance by MVP Tim Duncan for the Spurs to win in 6 games. Later on, Kidd got more help on those Nets teams with Vince Carter and Richard Jefferson, and they didn't do as much, which hurts his ranking, but like I said, people can downplay his achievements all they want, but unlike a player like Steve Nash, at least he can make the finals, and Jason Kidd's 2 finals over AI's 1 puts him over the edge here at the number 9 spot. Number 8. Dwayne Wade. Dwayne Wade was a bit hard to rank for me. Obviously, unlike a lot of people here, he didn't play the whole decade, and like others on this list, for most of it his team wasn't that great. But he gets the number 8 spot here for his amazing 2006 playoff run, specifically his finals performance. Now, people like to call the 2006 finals a conspiracy and say it was rigged in the Miami Heat's favor, with stuff such as bad calls and all the free throws they got. But you still can't take away anything from Wade's stellar performance, where he was averaging 30 points in his first NBA Finals in his 3rd season, winning his first NBA championship without Lebron James and Chris Bosh helping him like they would do later down the line. Wade completely earned that shit with one of the all-time great finals performances. And let's not forget his amazing 2009 regular season, which I feel like will get lost in history as time goes by due to the Heat not doing great in the playoffs that year, not having a great record unlike the Cavaliers, and of course LeBron winning his only MVP of the decade over Wade. Once again though, Dwayne Wade performed great that year, and that's what Dwayne Wade does. And despite Wade being fairly young during the 2000s, the dude played like a veteran. And because of how he played during the 2010s, people like to forget that Wade was super athletic and fast as well. I mean, there's a reason they call him Flash. It's not because he's a flash in the pan. It's because he was probably the fastest guard in the league, and no one could touch him. D. Wade made the Heat a consistent playoff team every year with his great play, and that's why he finds himself at number 8 here on this list. Number 7. Steve Nash. Steve Nash is a very talented player, but is also pretty overrated in my opinion. People go as far as calling him the point god, which says something. I will give Steve Nash the title of best point guard of the 2000s, even though Jason Kidd is probably a more all-around player. Steve Nash was phenomenal on offense, which is why he ran that 7 seconds or less key or 3 offense perfectly with the Suns. Nash is a great playmaker and a great shooter, and no one could really touch Phoenix on the offensive side of the ball. I'd say there were liabilities on D, Nash in particular. You can win a ton of regular season games outscoring the other team, and they were very successful in the regular season. That's why Steve Nash has his 2 regular season MVPs. The Sun didn't succeed quite as much in the playoffs, as they weren't defensively talented or deep enough to ever make the finals, no matter how good their offense was. They were a great team from 2005 to 2007, but only even made the conference finals once. Also, compared to the other MVP seasons of the decade, Steve Nash's is fairly underwhelming, but Nash intangibly still really helped that offense with his playmaking ability. His teams were great though, and wins don't lie. Steve Nash was a very efficient and capable scorer, but was still a pass-first point guard, which is a nice skill to have, to not be one-sided like Rondo or Lillard. Nash just doesn't have quite the playoff pedigree that others on this list have though, or the numbers that you'll find in my next entries. Number 6. Kevin Garnett. KG is one of my favorite players of all time. He is a natural leader, a great trash talker that can really back it up. Like MJ and Bird, he's had great numbers throughout his career and pulled some sorry Timberwolves teams to the playoffs outside of 2004 when they were decent. I think skill-wise, Kevin Garnett is just as talented of a power forward as Tim Duncan, but Duncan is a 5-time NBA champion, and Garnett only has the one. However, it was proven that when surrounded by other stars, KG can win a championship. Given Paul Pierce and Ray Allen are better players than Parker and Ginobili, but still, each time KG is surrounded by a good team, he succeeds. In 2004, the Timberwolves were actually good that year, and KG played like KG, and what did he get? An MVP, and made it all the way to the Western Conference Finals where he lost. But let's be fair, it was the Shaq and Kobe Lakers, plus veterans Karl Malone and Gary Payton. That T.O. squad was no match for them. Then fast forward a few years later on the Big Three Celtics, they won 64 games in the NBA Championship, proving that anything's possible if you have an actually good team. Garnett had such an impact on the Timberwolves due to his prowess on both sides of the court and off of it. He had such great leadership and determination that was put to good use when he got to the Celtics when they had good enough of a team for Garnett's impact to be seen, and they won a championship. People thought that KG was going to waste away his prime on a bad team, but he proved that
anything's possible. Anything's possible!
Number 5. Dirk Nowitzki. I don't know how I feel about putting Dirk over Garnett for the decade. He doesn't have better numbers, he didn't even win a championship. But something has to be said for changing the culture of a franchise as much as Nowitzki did. Throughout the whole decade, each year, Dirk and solely Dirk made the Mavericks a legitimate contender. That is something no one else can say. Nowitzki kept the Mavericks relevant throughout the 2000s. That's what a franchise player does. They may not have always made it far, but they got there each and every time. Now Nowitzki does have his faults, like how he was consistently choking in the playoffs, I'll give you that. But Nowitzki made the Mavericks the favorite to win the title 2 years straight. He lost both times, but still, he got the 2007 Mavericks 67 wins. I mean, this might be the only 67 plus win season in history that people barely remember or ever talk about. That and the 1973 Celtics and the 2016 Spurs. And just because they didn't win the championship. I mean, Dirk's squad lost in the first round to the AFC, which is extremely embarrassing, but that deserves to be talked about still. Nowitzki is, in terms of skill, the most offensively talented 7-footer ever behind Kevin Durant. The man had a 50-40-90 season. That's hard for anyone, but especially a power forward. The three-point shot wasn't even popular, and Nowitzki was still great at it. He could torch teams on all 3 levels of the court. And it's that ability that transformed the Mavericks into such a great team, even if it sometimes seemed to count more in the regular season than the playoffs. The first European superstar solidified himself as easily the greatest Maverick of all time and transformed Dallas into a title team, which in 2011 he eventually proved. Number 4. LeBron James. It was tough finding a spot for LeBron James on this list. I mean, he's LeBron James, but he wasn't quite LeBron James yet. Like, he was King James, but he wasn't quite the king yet. Basically, LeBron James was great in the 2000s, but he didn't have anywhere near the legacy he would go on to create in the 2010s when he made 8 straight finals appearances and would win 3 NBA championships and 3 more MVPs. 2000 LeBron's resume? 1 finals appearance where he was swept, and a great MVP year in 2009, where he led that Cavaliers squad somehow to 66 regular season wins, but lost in the conference finals to Dwight Howard and the Magic. With that being said, LeBron has, in my opinion, one of the top 3 years of his career in the 2000s in 2009, along with 2013 and 2018. LeBron was still LeBron, just without the championship pedigree. People were still hesitant about calling him one of the greatest players ever, and wondering if he would ever truly live up to his hype. He was this kid out of high school, selected with the number 1 pick, which meant he was put on a bad team. He did his best to transform this team into a contender. The front office, despite being blessed with a generational superstar, did not. The problem was LeBron James would get the Cavs to a pretty good regular season record, then they wouldn't go far in the playoffs, and that would also mean that they wouldn't get a good draft pick to get a better team, so they were basically stuck going nowhere, and hoping they'd be able to get over the hump eventually with LeBron's outstanding play. They did once in 2007, but were clearly no match for the Spurs, so James could never really get any playoff success this way, which is why he left in 2010. Though we're not discussing that at the moment. And something has to be said for LeBron willing his team to a 60-win season and willing them to a finals performance with that much talent. Something other stars were not able to do when put on a bad team, and that says something, and it's part of why he goes over guys like Garnett and Iverson who weren't capable of doing that. He may not have established himself as a champion this decade, but he did establish himself as the best player in the world by the end of it. Only the all-time greats can manage to not only have a team and system built around them, and then succeed too. James truly proved how special of a player he was, and elevated everyone around him, and got a team far in the East each and every year when they had no business being there. James was at peak athleticism by the end of the decade, and had some historic performances too. He may have just been in his early 20s, but he was extremely mature in the way he not only handled the pressure, but thrived under it, and lived up to the hype. And during the 2010s, he really claimed his throne. Number 3. Shaquille O'Neal. There seems to be very mixed opinions on Shaq when talking about the all-time greats. Some people put him top 5 and call him the most dominant player ever. Others put him in the lower half of the top 10. Some people don't put him top 10 at all. I'm looking at you, Bill Simmons. It's also a consistent debate on who's better in the all-time conversation, Shaq or Kobe. It's weird because they don't even play the same position, but ever since the superstar duo was born, it's hard not to compare them, especially after they parted their separate ways. People were desperate to see if Kobe could win without Shaq, or if Shaq could win without Kobe. You got the Kobe haters who said he wasn't that great and Shaq carried him, which we'll get to later. Personally, I doubt either one could have won without the other during that time period. I'd say the league was in the position to be pretty competitive, and every team had their star, and the Lakers were the only team in the league that had 2 legitimate superstar players, which allowed them to three-peat and be dominant. Without that, I'd say it would be up for grabs, which is shown by the fact that after the three-peat was over, a different team won the title each year of the decade, besides the Spurs. So Shaq's legacy, I believe, was immensely helped out by Kobe in terms of actually winning. But take nothing away from the player. He certainly, in his prime, was the most dominant player of the decade. When talking about Shaq's greatness, I'm talking about 2000-2005. The three-peat was obviously quite a feat, but O'Neal's individual accomplishments can speak for themselves as well. 2000 was probably the greatest season by center of all time in the modern era, where he averaged nearly 30 a game, 12 rebounds, 2 blocks, and led the Lakers to 67 games and the championship. It doesn't get much better than that, not to mention his insane finals performance that year, where he led both teams in points and rebounds in almost every game, and averaged 38 points and 17 rebounds a game. Yeah, I'll give you a moment to pick your jaw off the floor. Then, he won 3 finals MVPs, and even though it was probably definitely more Wade than him, he was able to win a chip without Kobe with the Heat. And while Wade maybe carried them in 2006, Shaq had a great year in 2005, and it's certainly debatable on whether or not Shaq should have won MVP that year over Nash. Along with Kobe, Shaq won the most championships this decade. It was the toughest decision ever to try to decide if I should put Shaq over Kobe, but I'll tell you why I made this decision. Shaq was only good from 2000 to 2005. That's why I focused only on those years. From then on, O'Neal was an alright center, but didn't have anywhere near the type of production to get him a spot on this list. He was a center who found himself as an out-of-shape, often injured veteran, playing for the Suns and Cavaliers, and really just spiraled down. And while he was valuable when healthy, not valuable enough for me to say he was a top 2 player of the entire 2000s. If we're talking about best players of a whole decade, I can't take someone that was only an all-star for 6 years of it. Kobe Bryant was a superstar each year, and that's what we're going to get to next. Number 2, Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant, love him, hate him, Kobe Bryant was excellent in the 2000s. He started out this decade with people basically saying he was riding the coattails of Shaq. I'll give you that maybe for 2000, that was clearly the Shaq squad, and they were only in the finals because of him. But after that, no more. By 2001, Bryant was a full-fledged superstar, and just about as important to the Lakers' success as Shaq. Maybe not as much, but close. It was a big part of them repeating. Opposing defenses had 2 monster threats to worry about. They could no longer put all of their attention on Shaq, because if you did, Kobe was going to torch you. He was a big reason why the offense was able to succeed, since there's someone else to worry about, and you couldn't design a defense to try to shut down one player, like the Jordan rules, for example, like the 80s Pistons. He was a big reason why that team would succeed as long as it did and won championships. To have a player on the team that could be a closer, as Shaq was a liability in that part of the game due to his awful free throw shooting. I don't think people give him as much credit for that part. They needed 2 to make that three-peat happen. One guy cannot take credit for a three-peat, not even Jordan. Every big man that succeeds needs its capable guard that can close out games. I'll admit, Shaq was the more dominant player on the team, but Kobe might have been more important to making them an actual championship team. There's a reason those Lakers teams could never get over the hump until Kobe came into his own. Eventually, both of their star powers were too strong to be able to cooperate on the same team, and the mega powers imploded. While in those years, Bryant didn't do much in terms of winning during the mid-2000s years, he certainly proved how dominant of a player he was, averaging 31.8 points a game from 2004-2007, including a game in 2006, the season that had the legendary 81-point game. Bryant decided that he was going to be the clear star player on the team, and was willing to sacrifice team success for a while to be able to have that, unlike LeBron. Fortunately, unlike so many other players, the LA front office was competent enough to build a team around him. In 2008, the Lakers traded for Pau Gasol, giving Bryant another star to work with, and Kobe did Kobe and won MVP and went to the finals, where he lost to the 2008 Celtics, who just so happened to be one of the best teams ever assembled, so it wasn't his fault really. However, in 2009, the Lakers won a championship, really enhancing Kobe's legacy, as he won a championship as the clear front and center of the team, getting his 4th ring. And as I'm sure you know, they repeated the next year, but that was 2010, so that doesn't help his ranking. Kobe won 4 championships this decade, but he did it his way. He knew his worth and he went out and got it, because that's how winning is done. Quote by Rocky Balboa. Number 1, Brian Scalabrine. I mean, we all saw this coming. The legendary White Mamba easily tops this list. I mean, do I really need an explanation? He's the man, the myth, the legend. Okay, I'm kidding. Let's actually get to number 1, Tim Duncan. The heart and soul of the San Antonio Spurs, no player embodies the Spurs more than him, on both sides of the ball. Tim Duncan was the perfect specimen to lead out Greg Popovich's vision. Like a Joe Montana or Tom Brady with Bill Walsh and Bill Belichick. That's what Duncan did with arguably the greatest coach in basketball history, Greg Popovich. He won 3 championships this decade, each time with him as the best player on the team, which is one reason why Duncan finds himself as number 1 on the list. Now, he won 2 Finals MVPs, the second most this decade behind Shaq, and 2 MVPs, the most, tied with Steve Nash. He's easily one of the greatest defenders of all time, though he has no Defensive Player of the Years. He's a phenomenal rebounder, but never led the league in rebounds. He's a very talented scorer, but no scoring titles. You're probably wondering how, if Duncan is the best player this decade, then how is he not the clear-cut best at anything? And to that, I answer, that perfectly embodies who Duncan was. He didn't need all the best stats or all the achievements to be a winner. In the postseason, the man always showed out, which is why he made 3 finals and won 3 championships. While the Spurs were a title contender every year, no matter how dire the team situation looked, Duncan pulled through and elevated everyone around him, which is extremely hard for a big man to do. Only Jokic and Walton have really pulled it off. He was a great leader, and while we all talk about how chill he is, he brought intensity on the court, which is part of why he was a great on defense and great rebounder, and he could create offense for his teammates at any time. Kind of like a playmaker in that way, even though he's a big. He would let all the other players on the team do their thing, while he would do other low maintenance things. And when his team needed a basket, Duncan goes and does his work in the post. What Duncan did is how championship teams are built. The Spurs were such a talented roster because he let other players develop. He knew that he was the best player around and that he could put up numbers like Shaq if he wanted to, but he let other players around him get more touches because he knew that's how a championship team was built. He bought into the Spurs. There's a reason why players like Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker seem like such steals. It's no coincidence. Duncan let them turn to stars by having more offensive touches. Duncan was willing to do whatever his team needed him to do to succeed. In the early 2000s, in Duncan's peak, he dominated, averaging 12 plus rebounds and 24 plus points, which earned them those 2 back-to-back MVPs. Those rosters weren't very good, so Duncan had to show out, and carried that team to a championship in 2003. Duncan always knew what his role would have to be to win a championship. Once players like Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili started to become stars, he could dial it back a bit. Duncan averaged a double-double every season, with about 20 points and 10 plus rebounds. In 2005, that Spurs team was very good and very well built on both sides of the floor, and they won the championship that year, and again in 2007, where only Parker won Finals MVP as Duncan let Parker do his thing. The Spurs are such a great franchise, in large part to Tim Duncan, who helped build a winning culture in San Antonio. It took a great coach like Popovich, and then a great player like Duncan to be able to carry it out. Tim Duncan is just as talented of a basketball player as anybody on this list, and he was ultimately the best winner that would ever took to achieve that during such a star-studded era, and that's what makes him the best player of the 2000s.